Do it. Good evening, everybody. This is Yehuda Shamroth from Ramat Beit Shemesh, Israel, introducing Rabbi Pinchas Winston, who so kindly gives us a weekly shiur and class on all kinds of topics of Torah, but especially those concerning the end of days, because that's where we're living in right now. I think everybody agrees on that. His new book called Strategy for the End of Days is actually a program which he'll explain to us. He is describing every week excerpts from his book and discussions. Final Destination is the topic of this week, and I highly recommend that you check into his new website, israeltorah.org. I'm sorry.
Nope.
No, that's Torah is where Josh Wander started his. I'm sorry. No, I meant to say Shar Nun Productions. It's right down on his underneath his name, and it's too small for me to see, but it's Shar SHAARNUN Productions.org, and you can read everything from Parsha HaShavua, the reading of the week, to history of the Jews, to Kabbalistic insights. So please don't forget to tune into Rabbi Winston. And right now, we're very excited. This is part 2 of a series of Strategy for the End of Days. And a shout out to Josh Wander, who is usually in and out of the Army and also very busy with encouraging people to make Aliyah. So don't forget to check the website, israeltorah.com, for new videos. He was one on Jonathan Pollard most recently, which is very interesting, and I think you'd find it amazing to hear. And there's going to be a special announcement at the end of this. Actually, I'll do it next week because we don't have the details finalized, but we're doing a new conference on Emergency Aliyah Conference, which Rabbi Winston hopefully will be involved in as well. Okay, Rabbi Winston, thank you for joining us once again.
Okay, thanks very much. It's you learn the Gemara. Gemara goes back to, it was actually written down around really 499 CE, which is like 1500 years ago, and that's already the Amoraim, the later generation writing it down. It's based upon the teachings of the Tanaim, which are the generations before that, which is the generations of the Mishnah, which goes back to, I believe, 186 CE as well, so almost 2,000 years ago. And they're talking about Yemos HaMashiach, they're talking about the end of days, they're talking about what to expect, and hoping it's going to happen in their times. And we know that Rabbi Kiva even invested some time and belief in Bar Kochba because he had some signs that he could also be Mashiach, at least in the beginning, until Rabbi Kiva saw that he was not the one to follow or to pursue, to help, and abandoned him, and that fell through eventually. There was a potential there apparently, but not. It didn't pan out. But they talk about it all the time, and it was real to them. It was very real to them, and I imagine, in some respects, it was also kind of real to those in the Holocaust, especially those in the camps where there was absolute despair and hopelessness, and you can't imagine history getting any worse for the Jews than it got at that point in time, at least those who were ensnarled in it, and there was only to look forward to redemption if you still believed in that kind of a thing, and it took on a whole different level of reality. For us, it's been a big distraction, not the Gul itself, but life itself. This has been a very pleasant exile. This has been thank God, at least for many of us, grew up in the Western world. Those who grew up in Russia can't really speak about that way today. They can, but for the longest time they lived in real exile, real shibud, real oppression. And but those who grew up in the Western world barely saw anti-Semitism most of their lives, and were finally accepted into Gentile society. We're able to go to work and work side by side with them and make the same kind of salaries, and even become, just like the Malbim predicted, become heads of the nations, to the point they were in the government and rising up to the top. And we had Jews, not necessarily those who associate with being Jewish per se, but still, that they could be Jewish and still try to become president is highly significant in that respect. It's not a great thing for us, but given what's gone on for thousands of years, ever since we went into exile in the first place, it's a remarkable thing. So as a result of that, just as the Malbim predicted, that many Jews would feel that's enough. That after all this time that we could, and then those who grew up into that era, they didn't know World War II, they didn't know the anti-Semitism of Europe. They grew up in a culture that was more open and more willing to accept the Jewish people, even Orthodox Jews, to the point that we have a lot of Orthodox billionaires today, which is incredible. Once upon a time, Rothschild was like the only one, and there weren't a lot of millionaires after that, unless people became completely secular and then went into the world of the Gentiles and lived like that. But to have so many religious people who have so much money is absolutely and in a very short period of time too. On top of all that, so that's a remarkable thing, and it certainly shows how comfortable that this exile has become. And ad kedei kach, that once upon a time, the shaila they had about whether you can drink the milk in America, you can't drink the milk in America because of chalav akum, chalav Yisrael. It has the halachas about when you can rely upon the milk that comes from Gentiles because it might not be cow's milk, and all kinds of issues to do with kashrus and all that. They went away for the most part. You live in most parts of America today, you can find tremendous kosher food. I remember being in the LaGuardia airport once, and this goes back about, I'd say 35 years, something like that, back to the early 1990s. And it was, there was in this big, huge airport. Obviously, there's a lot of Jews in New York and a lot of Jews traveling through New York. So there's certainly a business for it. But I remember seeing, this kiosk with beautiful kosher sandwiches inside of it in an airport, in a Gentile airport. No, this is not talking about Eretz Yisrael. I couldn't, at that time, I don't think you'd find sandwich like that in Ben Gurion. Today, today we have gourmet food, everything is cut up. But, it's just a sign of the times, and because of that, as the joke goes, Mashiach becomes an inconvenience more than a blessing until we actually have to need him. But in Roman times, they didn't have that type of lifestyle, and it was more than that. It wasn't just that they had difficult times; they did have good food, and they did have good conditions, relatively speaking, to the time itself. And that's not the reason why they were so intent on having Mashiach come, even though it might have meant having to give up certain things in the meantime because of the wars that might result. Because the Medrash does say that there are 3 wars of Gog and Magog. We've already had 2 of them according to Chafetz Chaim. According to history, it seems we've already had at least two. And the third one is the one we're concerned about, looming over the horizon at this point in time. Whether it's going to happen or not is inevitable. We've already had the other one, so they happen even though we may have tried to stop them from happening. But if Hashem wants them to happen, they're going to happen. And it says, the Medrash itself says that it's actually Mashiach himself, the appearance of Mashiach, that will instigate the nations to come up against the Jewish people in Yerushalayim. And, that's concerning for sure. But they understood, the Tanaim understood, and the Amoraim and those people of that generation, they understood that as comfortable, as nice as exile can become, it's not the redemption. It can never be the redemption, because the entire time that the Jewish people are spread, for example, Parshas Para, we just read it in the last Shabbos, was Parshas Para, right? Parshas Para, for that a special Haftarah for Parshas Para speaks about Hashem has to end the exile. Not because we're worthy of it, not because, he doesn't mention the time has run out. Why is he going to end the exile and bring the Jewish people home? He says, because of the Chil Hashem that the Jewish people create by living in the diaspora. Just even if you keep all Torah mitzvahs as much as possible, the fact that Jews are in the diaspora is Chil Hashem. But I wish that was the only problem. Unfortunately, we've assimilated and intermarried, and even the religious Jews not up to the same level they were once, let's say, back in Europe. But Moshe Feinstein speaks about this and makes a comparison and points out the problem. In his time, he didn't think it was going they at all, and it's a Chil Hashem, and for that reason, the Kodesh Baruch Hu has to. But he has to end it just to end the Shem, to sanctify his own name. But if he would ask the average person living in Chutz La'aretz, they're not so concerned. But unless something really major happens that makes the Jews stand out in a very negative light, most people think there's no, don't perceive it. And the Zohar says that, the Zohar for this, but the entire time that the Jewish people in exile, the entire time that there's no Beis Hamikdash, the entire time that the Shechina is wandering, so to speak, because every time the Jews go like that, the Shechina goes with them, and every time that we don't have Beis Hamikdash with the Shechina inside of it, it's a huge chilul Hashem, and it causes tremendous suffering. So even though we're having a good time, the Shechina is not. God's not. It's like a son or a child who is enjoying themselves, but they know their father's suffering. Their father, for whatever reason, it takes away from the that we can't see our father's suffering. We don't know that our father is suffering unless you take the time to understand why that's the case. So they were real with that. They understood that that was their reality. Everything else was just secondary. They were on target for Judaism, Jewish history in themselves, and so for that reason, they really lived from day to day, hoping the Mashiach would come any moment in time. Whereas today, it's such a distant reality. I mean, how many people even talk about it? How many times have Rabbanim gone up and spoken between Kabbalah Shabbos and Mari on a Friday night when we tend to talk about halacha and sometimes it'd be a drushes like that, but we don't get into the topic of goulash and Mashiach, and so it's a distant mindset. It's a distant reality. So because of that, we're not prepared, and it's a dream. It's like literally. I mean, for those who do want it to happen, it's like a dream. Meaning that it's not that fantasy type, feeling to it. And as a result of that, that's why we're so unprepared, and that's why a strategy becomes necessary. So obviously, the book that I'm working on right now is more extensive. It goes into far more detail and builds the discussions and all that. But what I try to do is synthesize some of the points, the main points, and just discuss them here, because this is something I would like to see get out as far and wide as possible, because I think a lot of people need to hear what we need to do to be able to get ready for what's coming up, because it will come up. We just say the words over. Even you have to understand, even for me, it's difficult to believe. It's hard to comprehend, to get it not just in my head, but also my heart, that I'm real with it, because it's not my reality. It's not what I'm used to. It's just very cerebral at this point in time. But every exile has to come to an end. There's no way around it. That's if you believe in God and you believe in Torah and you believe in the Jewish people and you believe in history, then you have to also believe that every exile has to come to an end. And the only question is when. Well, maybe not. The second question is and how. When and how. And they actually are connected to each other, because when also affects how. Because it happens early, it means that we're more meritorious. And as a result of that, it can happen, we can mitigate it. It can be softened. But if it happens at the last possible moment, like the Gemara talks about, then the war of Gog and Magog. And how severe a war of Gog and Magog? Well, that again, remains to be seen. But it's clear that even if we hold of all these funny types of hashkachas, the way God runs the world, which I've spoken about before in the past, alilus, which is a pretext where God makes it look like this is the reason for something, but something else is going on instead that had to happen. For example, as the Medrash says, that Yaakov would never have shown favoritism to Yosef Yosef had to be hated by his brothers, so they would sell him down into Egypt as a slave. They all end up going down eventually to fulfill the gezerah, the decree of being in a land not yours for 400 years and oppression and all that from Brisbane and Basar. So that's a lilus, okay? And alaba machshel lefanai, which is another level or similar form of divine providence, whereas God says to Moshe Rabbeinu, no, there's things going on in history you're not going to understand. They're too primordial, they're too ethereal. You're not going to be able to. You can't. If I showed you that light, you would die from the exposure. And that's the second one. And Kavshir Rahmana, same idea. Mysteries of God, right? Chizkiah doesn't want to give birth to Menashe because he knows through prophecy he's going to become someone who would lead the country back to idol worship after Chizki himself led them back to Torah. One generation already, undoing it all. And he wanted to stop that. And God said, nope, your job is to have a son, raise him best you can. If he decides, and it happens to be that that's what's going to happen, that's my business. But why would you want that, God? Why you have mitzvahs and we're doing the best. Why would you allow that to happen? That's a good question, but you're not going to get the answer right now. Later on, maybe in this world, maybe not this world. There's an answer. It's a divine logic. But as God told Yeshaya, right, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways of doing things are not your ways of doing things. So there's a big difference. And don't try to understand me only with human logic. Some of your logic I gave to you that you can understand aspects of it, but at the end of the day, I'm way beyond all of that. So you're just going to have Amunah and Bitachon, right? And the last one, Mir Tachbolus, there might be others too, but these are the four main ones, which literally means scheming and trickery. And that's where God basically makes it appear that something redemption-like is not redemption-like. Because of the way that things are going for the Jewish people, and as a result of that, if it becomes clear that things are moving the direction of redemption, so the Sitra Achra and the Klippas, whatever you want to call them, the evil will jump all over it and stop it. So sometimes God disguises things, historical events, that to fool the Sitra Achra until after. Like, for example, Lot and his daughters. Classic case in point, where he is doing something that Torah forbids outright. And not just that, but they become pregnant and they name their children, and one says Moab, because it came from my father. She's naming a child after this illicit act. And this child, eventually makes its way from that side back into the Jewish people in the form of Rus, who becomes the ancestors of David HaMelech. And by the time the Sitra wakes up, that's scheming and fooling. God's doing this all the time. I mean, some would argue that 1948 was the same idea, getting back the Jewish state by secular people. It's such a good camouflaging of events that it even fools the Jewish people too. That many, how could it be? How could God possibly trigger the redemption process? Well, happened before that, but through people who don't even believe in him, won't even put his name in the Constitution. That's not a question for Jewish history. Evan Ma'asu Aboinim Haisa Larosh Pina David Melech, right? The stone that the builders rejected, right? The brothers and even Shmuel Navi rejected David HaMelech, but that became the cornerstone for Kodesh Baruch Hu. Yosef was rejected. I point out to people, like, if you had been there, right, if we had been there at the time that the brothers were discussing the sale of Yosef, and they turned to us and they said, what should we do? Sell him or not sell him? We would have said sell him. All these great people saying to sell him, and we're going to go against that? It's only later on, because we see how the whole story unfolds, we realize, and this is Jewish history. This is Jewish history. Tamar and Yehuda, if we would have been there, burn her, not burn. Yeah, burn her. She's a bus Cohen, burn her. Oh, she's innocent? Oops. Thank God we saved her just in time. That's Jewish history. Jewish history is the most convoluted thing. It's one of the proofs of Torah, I think. And I mean proofs of Torah because, not just evidence, but proofs, because when you examine the whole thing, you look at the details. Nobody has a history like that. No one even comes close to ideas like that. No one. It's just so out there, And when you look at the whole perspective, the whole big picture, it just becomes clear this has to be real. This has to be true. It has to all have meaning. So you have all these anhagas, and then you have this concept of shviras hakeilim, the breaking of the vessels, which is a Kabbalah concept that most people don't even know, and most people won't even know about, but it is the basis of all of history. And you have the Tatka Doris. You have the 974 generations that existed prior to the creation of the world that some people got wind of, and they like to believe that this is not the first or last world that God created, that we're just another world along the way. And the reason why we seem like the element, because we're living in it right now. Like scientists believe, who don't want to believe in God, that in the design principle, will say, no, it just happens to be that we are the one that worked out of many that did not work, and we're here to see it so we can talk about it. But other than that, the fact that it was a carbon, atom that existed only temporarily for the May creation and the coincidence and the you can do all kinds of stuff like that in the end. But it's not Mustaber. Doesn't make sense. Not logical at all. And there's so much going on that really, when you put it all together and you sit down and say, where should I go? What should I do? How should I deal with it? Do I even have free will? And if I have free will, how does it work? How does it mesh with everything else going on around me and all that? We discussed some of that discussions, but when it's all said and done, right, it doesn't make a difference. God has told us things. He gave us, prophecy. He gave us prophets. And those prophets conveyed to us what God wanted us to know. Moshe being the greatest of them all, who spoke to God face to face, Kivyochel, it says, he got the information, not through some imagination and dream and all that. He was conscious for it, and he heard the words, and he wrote it down, letter by letter, word by word. And we have that, and most of the tradition that goes along with it. And we know, and you can argue all kinds of points, but it's not worth it. You have a cup of coffee with a piece of cake, and you want to discuss some deep philosophical ideas, fine. But we're ending up at the end of history in our lifetime. I know it's hard to believe. It's really hard to digest and to accept, but that's what's happening. Because how do we know? Well, I'm not going to go into that right now. I have several books to discuss, and I'm not going to talk about it now. There are so many different signs to indicate, yeah, it's got to be. Can I tell you absolutely 100%? No, I can't. Why should I be able to? That's a privilege that God grants certain people in history, but not the average person. And he does talk to us, though, through the events and through our enemies even, to tell us, when Julius Streicher, one of the architects of the Holocaust, one of the 10 people who are going to be, who were hung or hanged, during the Nuremberg trials, and he goes up to the gallows. As he's walking up there, he turns around and he yells out, and this was in Newsweek, the world knew about this and knows about it, right? Yells out, Purim Fest, 1946. And Newsweek does their research and writes down a little footnote, Purim is a Jewish holiday. It's a Jewish festival. Our enemy, Julius Streicher, is yelling out Purim Fest 1946 because the connection to the Megillah, the 10 sons of Haman, right, who were hanged at that time. And Esther makes this comment that the three letters that are smaller are this, end up being the gatria of the year that the Nuremberg trials took place. You can go to this, seminars and see this all laid out beautifully, explained wonderfully, right? And the fact that she makes this comment, if it pleases the king, can we do this again tomorrow? And we just did it today. So what do you mean tomorrow? He's like, what's it talking? So we assume it's stuck with the future, so it has some Ruach HaKodesh like that. Right? And he goes up there and he yells Purim Fest 1946. Why? Did he know what he was talking about? Doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference. The point is, it came out of his mouth, and we heard it. And that's a message from God telling us that, what just happened over these last few years? This wasn't my going on vacation and mankind, sinking to new levels of depravity. What's the word? Depravity, right? That they I was in charge the entire time, making it every last detail. I understand you'll have lots of questions and lots of pain, but this was something. And we see after that comes Eretz Israel. We get the land back and we're able to build towards Gula. There's lots and lots of things, so many details to put together. Even how the president, Harry S. Truman, became president, and the hashgacha parties behind all of that. and his involvement in getting the UN to accept Israel as a nation, which for the longest time, I thought, well, who cares? It's our land. God gave it to us. We don't need the UN to tell us that it belongs to us, and then we can have it. That's what I thought for the longest time. And then I saw the Gra says, no, the Gra says, that's not the way it works. Just learn more things. And those things change your perspective. What was the Gra say? He says, well, if you do tshuva, you do massive tshuva, then you can have the land without the nations. The nations will just give it to you. They won't get in your way. They'll bless you, right? But if you don't do it that way, it has to come what's called they're small, right? From the side of din, the sign of more tevidic way. And then he says it's like the time of Koresh back in the first exile, where you have to have the permission of the nations of the world to take your land back again, to go back. And all of a sudden, it changes the whole historical reality of what took place back in 1948, 1947. Aside from one of the most remarkable gematrias, where I'm sort of like, this is all secondary, but it's just too good to leave out. That when they finally decided to the state was finally proclaimed, it was the 5th of Iyar in 5708, I believe it was. Yes, 5708, and the 20th day, the Omer, which the Gra says is very propitious for Gula and things like that. So that's also amazing, because these are secular people. Why would they choose a Jewish date? And it happens to be the 20th day of the Omer. It works out. Again, more Hashgacha Pratis, more divine providence, telling us something, communicating to us something about what's happening in history at that time. But what's even more remarkable is that when they finally decided that this was going to become a reality, was actually the previous Hanukkah. The Hanukkah before that time goes back to Kislev. It was on the 16th of Kislev, and that 5708, right? It was 1947, because it wasn't past January yet, but the Jewish year began already Rosh Hashanah, so it was 5708, but 1947. Right, but it was 16th of Kislev when it was decided that the Jewish state was going to be formed officially, and it just took time until the 5th of Iyar to make it official in the UN and the whole thing. So it turns out that the gematria of, if you add up, the year itself, you don't count the 5, because we like, you look at the calendar. The calendar is not mentioned the 5,000, since a millennium only changes once every 1,000 years. We only look at the last few numbers. That changes every year. So the number would be 708. Now it should be 5708. That's the full number, but the calendars don't show that, right? This is 5784, but we only show the 784 in the calendars. So if you take the 708 and you add up the gematria of the word Kislev plus the 16 of the day that was decided, and they didn't plan this. This just happened to work out. And the person who came up with this gematria came up with it recently. I mean, it wasn't back at that time. And it turns out that it's equal to the gematria of Achish and Bita, the words of in the pasuk from Yeshaya about the final redemption. Both Achish, which means hasten, and Bita means it's final. But the gematria of those two words is 851, not 850. So close. I mean, that's 850. And this is talking about the Gula, and it's 851. So can you accept it? With just being off by one, you do, by the way, just so you should know, in Kabbalah, there are gematrias where they're off by one and they're completely acceptable. Because sometimes the one means something. Some of the extra means you can take it off, because it's kol everything. There are rules to do with gematria. So you could do the same thing here, possibly. Right, but you don't even have to. Why? Because the event itself took place in New York at 5:30 in the afternoon, but it was already 7 hours later. It was already 12:30 at night in Eretz Israel, and at 12:30 at night in Eretz Israel is already the next day. So it was already the 17th of Kislev at the time this took place. So now the gematria is exactly equal. So you'll say, but it took place in New York. Why go after Yisrael? So in the Sefer Tuva Aretz, he says, because whatever and it's a little longer discussion to it's feeling all that, because whatever happens to any Jew anywhere in the world, what happens to Jewish people in the world, is decided based upon what goes on in Israel. Israel is the Yishuv of the Jewish people, the son of the universe. So therefore, what counts in terms of time and date is Eretz Israel. So it turns out the Gemara is exactly the same. The odds of that happening are absolutely fantastic, tremendous. I mean, it's mind-boggling, it's mind-blowing, and because of that, you have to really get to see that Kosh Baruch Hu's talking to. He talks to us through these things, little pieces of information, and in and of themselves, maybe they're not too much to stand on. But collected together and put into a larger picture, it becomes impossible, literally impossible, to deny the reality that we are where we are today at the end of days. So, having said all that, right, half an hour later, the first thing about the final destination, I mean, you're having a strategy for the days. The point of the strategy is to do that, what is possible to do, to hopefully protect you from the events. Because what are we concerned about? We want the redemption to come. We want Mashiach to come, hopefully. We want the world to return back to a true and false level of reality, and evil to disappear, and all the mishugas and confusion to go. We want that. It's just this threshold that we have to go over, called the Chevli Mashiach, the birth pangs of Mashiach. Right? It's like a woman. You know, she wants to have a child. She wants to have children. She loves the idea. But she knows that if she's going to get pregnant and give birth, she's going to have to go through labor and all that, and all the pain that comes with it. And it's intimidating. For some people, it's so intimidating, they don't have children. Others, you know, the mitzvah, they want it, they sacrifice. They make that sacrifice and put up with it because they figure, you know, a couple hours, maybe half a day of such a thing, maybe a full day, something's, you know, is worth years and years of raising your children. Except when they start to misbehave later on, then just I wonder, is it really worth it? But it is, obviously, all joking aside. So, you know, this is, you know, it's all part of this process of getting to the final redemption. But it turns out there are things you can do, because we see in the Gemara, and we see in the Holy Sforim, where they talk about that this is a thing to do to avoid Chevle Mashiach, to avoid the war of Gog and Magog. So we're already told by, if the Chazal didn't say it, then it would be difficult to say it ourselves. But since Chazal themselves, and some of them seem so obvious, so pashut, like having all 3 meals on Shabbos, is supposed to be a skula, but a real, you know, I say skula, it's more almost like a halacha. I mean, there is a halacha to 3 meals, but it's like a halacha that you can save yourself from Chevle Mashiach by having all 3 meals. Lots of people had 3 meals on Shabbos before the Holocaust, and before the pogroms, and during the pogroms. So, you know, what does this mean? Okay, it's like the Gemara says often, you do this, you can have long life. And the Gemara itself says, but there are people who did that didn't have long life. Well, it means that if you're doing this and everything else, you know, the whole list of things, then it's going to add the possibility of having a long life. So is it absolute? No, but it certainly increases your odds. Certainly much better to do it than not to do it. Man, what's the problem? Having 3 meals on Shabbos is a wonderful thing. If someone, as the Gemara, as the halacha says, right, a person understands the importance of all 3 meals, they'll hold themselves back at Shabbos lunch, no matter how much is being served, and make sure they have an appetite for Suda Shlishis. Because it's not just the mitzvah of Shabbat, but why does it make a difference? Why do 3 meals in Shabbos make a difference to what's going to happen to a person at the end of the day? So we'll get to that, B'ezras Hashem. But the first thing we have to understand is, you know, what is history for? What's the whole point of history? What are we doing here? What does God want from us? What is all this leading to? Right down to every last detail. You tie your shoes in the course of your day, you have lunch, whatever. The smallest, most personalized things that we do in this world are all part of the package of things that we have to do as human beings living in this world, and specifically as the Jewish people living in this world. So, you know, what is that? What is our mission statement? We know the Shema is basically our mission statement. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That is primarily, first and foremost, our mission statement, right? That's what it says in Torah. But what's that for? What's it all about? Why is it the mission statement of the Jewish people? So the one pasuk that sums up everything. I mean, everything is the one pasuk that we say 3 times a day. At least men do, because they daven Shachris Mincha Mariv. It's part of the Musaf and Yom Kippur as well. But we say it, the Psukim, B'yomahu Yeshem Echad Shmo Echad. Hashem Melech Al Kol Haaretz, and we say B'yomahu Yeshem Echad Shmo Echad. Excuse me. Meaning what? That the whole goal, right? Like right now, is God king over the entire? Well, yes, of course, he's always king. It's his kingdom. But the trouble is, there's a rebellion going on. Not a conscious one all the time. Some of it is conscious, but there's a rebellion going on. What's the rebellion? Well, mankind is not accepting God on his own terms, the way he wants to be accepted. Even to the point there are different religions, different versions of what they think God's supposed to be like. They're made Jews who claim to be atheists and agnostic. So that's got to change. Not just that, but his name has to be one. He has to be one, and his name must be one. What? Somehow there's a division in God. God is one. That's what we say every single day. It's a contradiction. Hear, O Israel, the Lord God that is one. That's what we say every single day, twice a day. 3 times to include right before we go to bed. So, is he one? Is he not one? Is he supposed to be one, but he's not right? No, he's one. So then where's the lack of oneness that we're talking about? Well, in our minds. That's what exists. So that's got to change. Well, what does it look like? How's it projected into everyday reality? Very simple. We act in ways that are not consistent with their belief. We're not talking about people who don't believe at all. We're not talking about people who are confused and not sure what to believe. We're not talking about people who believe, but they're not quite clear what it means to believe. We're talking about people who understand, as it says in the first of the 13 principles of faith, that God has done everything. Anything that has ever happened or existed is from God. Everything that's happening and exists now is from God. And everything that's ever going to happen in the future and is going to exist will be from God. It's all God. There's nothing else but God. Nothing else but God. So why am I afraid of Hamas? Why am I afraid of Iran? Why do I panic if I hear that something's going to happen that might threaten me? What am I scared about? There's a Gemara in Bruchas of Rabbi Winston, the great miracle worker, and there's this arud, kind of a serpent snake, that's killing people. White people killing people. So what does he do? He goes and he puts his foot over the hole that it's living inside of. And of course the snake sees this and it comes and he bites him. But the snake dies. So Rechini Mendoza takes the snake out of the hole, this big long python or something like that, and he puts it around his neck. He comes in the basement just wearing the snake, and he makes this remarkable statement to Tamach HaChomim. He's not talking them Ratzi. He's not going to the streets and the shuks and saying, he's going to the base medrash, where people are learning about this all the time, and he says, you see, it's not snakes that kill, it's sin that kills. Yaakov Avinu knows that Esav has no power. He's not afraid of Esav. Not afraid of Esav. He's afraid of the fact that he didn't mechabed his parents for 22 years. I mean, that's a little hard to understand also because that's why he was there in the first place. But he was worried that because of the fact that he was away from home, because Esav and whatever Kibbutz Esav did believe he was not Kehilchasa, not the way it's supposed to be done. Relative to who he was, it was whatever. But Yaakov, he was away from home. He could not take care of his father and mother's needs locally as Esav did. So he was worried that maybe he lacked the merit, the schus, to be protected against Esav. Knows his sin was going to cause him to get harmed, not because Esav has independent power. So Yaakov is real with that. Although there are some complaints about Yaakov and the way he dealt with it, the Medrash says, which is why we're in exile this very day. And that's a discussion to itself, what he meant, why he did it, humility. But that's the way he teaches the whole world that if you're real with the oneness of God, then you understand that only God decides. The Gemara in Chulin says beferish, it says outright that no one even hurts you can't raise your hand, you can't stub your finger, nothing can happen to you. If you trip as you're walking, it's hashgacha pratis. It may look random, you might want to call it an accident because you don't want to take responsibility for it, but God did that. Why now here? Okay. Sometimes it's just tikkun. Sometimes the humiliation a person suffers that it happens in public, right? Is tikkun, and because you're not doing the tikkun on your own. Other times it's to talk to you, teach you a message. But this reality where I understand that my paycheck comes directly from God, even if it comes through the hands of an employer, that I'm so real with this concept. It's very hard right now to be that way because the gate to horror blocks us. It's like being around someone who's nervous all the time, right? Even though you're not the nervous type yourself, but they are, and they're always talking. What about this? What about this? And what I'm afraid, and it spills over. It's kind of like hard to have that sense of calm that you might have on your own because they're doing this. So the Yitzhak always doing the same thing to us all the time. How many times have we eaten when we're saying, I don't want to eat, but your body's saying, yeah, let's eat. Instinctually, let's eat. Let's do this. Let's stay up late. Let's waste time, constantly. And that's what Rabbi Alexandri says in the Gemara. He says that, Kosh Baruch Hu, that all we want to do is serve you. That's the whole, just serve you, day and night, all the time. Why don't we? Because of the Sa'or Shebe'isa, which literally means the yeast, right, the leaven in the dough, because that's what makes bread rise. But in this case, it's talking about the Sahara that bloats a person's ego and makes them do things they shouldn't do, right? And Shibud Malchus, and the fact that other nations are constantly breathing down our neck and causing us all kinds of service in Yisurim all the time. Otherwise, if it wasn't for that, we'd be serving you day and night because that's what we want to do. And that's the way it's going to be in Mashiach once Hashem takes with the Sahara. So that's the whole goal. The whole goal is to get to that level of reality. Now, can we get to it perfectly in this world? Has anybody? I don't know. Maybe some tzaddikim. Maybe the times of Tanaim. Maybe, Moshe Rabbeinu did, but he was miyuchad. He was different. Even Yeshua he's called the moon compared to the sun, so he wasn't the same level. So he's criticized for certain things by Kosh Baruch himself. So after that, and then goes Yerisa Doris, gets worse and worse and worse. So it's all relative. Hashem takes into account the level of a generation, what they're capable of accomplishing, not accomplishing, 100%. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean that we can't work on it. It doesn't mean that we can't get to that level. I mean, literally every day we just go with the flow, and things just pop up, and we're forced to deal with them, and they catch us by surprise. And the first reaction is the Yitzhahara's reaction, because you see with your eyes, and your emotions are raw. And they're just there vulnerable. Unless you are working on yourself and becoming a Baal B'tachon, literally that is your avoda. There are people like that, very few, who sit there every day, they're not just running around doing mitzvahs. They run around doing mitzvahs, but they also make a point of drilling this knowledge into their head and pushing it down into their heart. So they're walking with it. We mentioned before the Medrash that says, at the end of this on Yom Adin, because Baruch Hu will say Ani Hashem, just like Yosef said Ani Yosef, and that's all he has to say, Ani Yosef. Right? I think he said my father's still alive, but Ani Yosef was already enough. The fact he said Ani Yosef, the brothers were stunned and silenced and shocked. So the Medrash says, learn from this thing that this is what happened to Yom Adin. Yom Adin Hashem, Ani Hashem, and the whole judgment will be that. Why? What does that do? Ani Hashem, how does that judge us? Because it's Hashem and Elokeinu. Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Right? Hashem is splitting the sea, giving the Torah, doing the makos, all those fantastic, miraculous hashgacha pratis where you go, yeah, that's definitely hashgacha. It's definitely Kosh Baruch Hu. He runs the world, all that. People talked about it during the six-day work because it's so outside the box of victories. So, we don't live with the reality of Hashem. We live with the reality of Elohim. And the reality of Elohim is the reality of Hashem working b'derech teva through nature, and then we get fooled by that. The veil, right? It's a costume. It's a levush. It's clothing. and we get fooled by that. Maybe after the fact, some people are smart to sit down and say, wait a second, I got, let me just see through all this and see the reality of what's really going on. But most people don't. They just go, that's the way Hashem is in there somewhere. I know he's behind it pulling the strings, but Mordechai wasn't afraid of Haman, and Moshe wasn't afraid of Paro because they were real with this reality. That's why, as we spoke about before in the past, that you take the gematria of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and you subtract it from the gematria of Baruch Shem Kavod Machuso Le'olam Ve'ed, the second verse, you get 240. And 240 is the gematria of Safek, which means doubt, and of course, Amalek. In other words, the Shema plus doubt, the clarity of the Shema, the knowledge of this idea of the Shema, but you get doubt. We ate from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That changed mankind, changed the perspective. We went down lower. The moment you enter doubt, all of a sudden the Shema becomes Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Ved, which speaks about the Yuchad of Hashem, but on a lower level, on a level more of Emunah, not of clarity. The Shema is the angels calling it as they see it. That's that clarity. But Baruch Shem Kavod, that's us saying, we can't really see it, but we believe it. We're willing to believe it, and that's why, according to the Hashem, that we say it quietly. We whisper it because it's a secret. It's a secret, meaning that not everyone believes the same thing. They can't see the same thing. So if a person is working on this, that's the final destination. We just started. We haven't got into the whole discussion yet because there's more to go. But that's the starting point of this whole discussion is that's the final destination. That's what we have to get to. That's the goal. You work on that and you improve in that, then you are building armor for yourself against Cheved Mashiach. And we'll see how far this really goes because it goes all over the place. And we'll see how it affects Shabbos and things like that. But it's the beginning of the discussion. It's enough to work on for 1 week. B'ezras Hashem. Have a great and peaceful Shabbos, B'ezras Hashem. And we'll see you next week. God willing.
Okay, Rabbi, I was just about to ask. That was really fascinating, as always. People are making comments on the StreamYard, on the the website for Israel Torah, just conferring what you were saying and agreeing to what you were saying. In fact, somebody said, "Ain't old milvado." Where and in Eov, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Right. Tell me, you have some understanding. Who determined the measurements? Surely you know. We hear this in all different places where we're learning to what you're saying. So thank you for confirming that we will meet next week, God willing. And everybody have a wonderful Shabbat and a good end of your week. And please join us again next week. And please pass this on to all your friends. And I think next week we're going to try to do some questions and answers. We'll try to orchestrate that so it can work a little more smoothly. Okay, Rabbi?
Okay.
Okay, thanks. Thanks so much. Good night, everyone.